Well, thanks so much for having me here. I think it's so great that after the floods and everything that has happened to the community, that there's been an opportunity for groups to build in strength in the community, and that everyone's getting around together. And I feel like it's been a really hard 12 months for myself personally, and for all the people I care about. So it's so great that there's this strong community here, and so stoked to be invited to it. It's really great to talk after Ollie. I really like hearing you talk, Ollie. And I hope that what I say can just follow on from what Ollie was talking about, particularly near the end of his talk. And I hope that what I'm saying doesn't appear to be in conflict with what Ollie's talking about. We can just run my first slide up. Yeah, so I hope that what I say doesn't appear to be in conflict with Ollie. I'm a bush regenerator. That's who I am. And I was raised in this area around rainforests. I have a real passion for rainforests. I was lucky enough, on the property where I grew up, we had a remnant stand of rainforest that you'd drive down the driveway through the middle of an old growth remnant to get to our house. So it's one of the only places in the whole area where you can do that. And so I was raised totally immersed in rainforest, around bush regenerators, dodgy blokes smoking something weird down the back of the property forever. We had Green Corps and endless work done on our property by the government for years, and that's the environment we were raised in. So my brother and I both ended up becoming bush regenerators. I'm a seed collector. I collect rainforest seeds. I work at a big rainforest nursery. I'm involved in projects. I like to hear what's going on. I love tree planting. I love all this stuff. But because of that, I'm a rainforest guy. So sometimes it can seem like that's in conflict with the dry sclerophyll world and the world of fire and all these things. But they're not really in conflict. It's just about people who love the environment and love different ecosystems and want to see stuff healthy. So I was so stoked that Ollie was talking about finding a really good place, something that's really valuable, and showing how you can enrich that and really learning from that good place. I think really is the key. That's the beautiful thing about nature. There's so much to learn and there's so many details and it's so rich that you need to go to it with respect. And that's something that definitely Ollie can bring with what he said. You need to go to it with respect and learn from it. Don't think you're going to learn instantly. It's not going to happen overnight, but you've got to learn to understand it. So probably the first thing that I'll talk about for learning to understand how those native environments work with us is assessing maybe just that gap between the different fire-affected bushlands and the non-fire things with rainforests. So in our dry sclerophyll environments, which may exist, along Indigenous pathways, or they may just exist broadly in a landscape of reduced fertility, you're going to see those eucalyptus species. And in that healthy environment, you've got eucalyptus species, and then you've got heaps of light penetration, massive amounts of airflow through that environment, and hopefully a really complex grass layer. So then again, that's something Ollie was talking about. So if you're looking to assess your environment and trying to do the best for your environment, you want to look at these markers. So if you've got really complex grass layer, then you may be really good for dry sclerophyll. And if you're going to work in that environment and make it healthy, you have to be learning and understanding about what these guys are doing with fire. So obviously, all that practice then moves through a really broad crossover grey area as the soils become richer, as you start working in higher rainfall areas where you're going to get rapid growth. And it's in those environments then that you're going to have to make some hard decisions. So because we're in this rich, beautiful, high growth area, we have high growth problems. We have massive weed problems. And then you get into a rich soil. This is a great site. This is a site and a time in a dream season where you have the opportunity to do anything you want with the environment. But on the flip side of that, you're getting drowned in the fertility, Everything's getting away from you and you can't handle it. So as you move between those environments and you look at some of the differences, and then you go back and you go, okay, stop. We've got to find a healthy place to learn from. We've got to find something to love and something to cherish to make all this work worthwhile. So for us, in the really rich world, the really wet world, we have the rainforest. So the rainforest is really complex. Its tree species are all really different. They've evolved down really different pathways, and so they have lots and lots of family diversity in the species level. And their characteristic is that they have low airflow and low light penetration, and they create their own climates and shade. And so with the rainforest regen world in a really high nutrient environment, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to recreate really dense canopies that exclude weeds and only allow the rainforest to self-perpetuate itself as an ecosystem. And then you're going to run into the problems in between those areas where you've got eucalypts, say, growing in a rich area where there might be a really great grassland here that you could work with and burn, and then you might have a huge lantana patch as it comes into eucalypts that are growing in a marginal rainforest area. So if you clear a rainforest paddock, you can still get eucalypts germinating in that paddock, and then you can get the massive weed associations underneath eucalypt because they're letting so much light in. So it can be a real sticking point to try to understand what your environment should be like, and there's not really a really simple way for me to tell you it right now. I'm just going to talk to slides. I'm going to talk to basically 2 slides. So you guys just ask questions as you come along, because I'm going to get, from your questions, I'll actually get what kind of landowners you guys are, where you guys are at with your projects, and what you're focused on, you know. So just feel free to stick your hand up at any time. Okay, question. Macarangas. Yeah, macarangas. Yeah, so macarangas in that environment, they're fighting for the rainforest in a way, you know. They're fighting to establish they're part of a different succession towards a different ecosystem. So a macaranga is what we call a pioneer species. So it grows up, it loves light, and then it creates a lot of shade and introduces a huge amount of leaf drop so that things can't exist on the ground level. And that's really bad for a sclerophyll environment because it's repressing all the grass and ground layer diversity that the sclerophyll relies on to be healthy. So the macaranga is transitioning the two, is going from a sclerophyllous thing towards a rainforest. But if you're, as Ollie hinted at as well, if your thing is really, you can tell it wants to be, you should be burning it and it wants to be a sclerophyllous environment, you're not going to make it all the way to the rainforest anyway. So then you end up with just macarangas, a few other things, and a bit of a mess. So, I mean, culling macarangas is something that people end up doing. But if you're doing a rainforest project, a full-blown, beautiful rainforest project, you'd be loving your macarangas. Yeah. So yeah, giant devil's fig. Well, I think that you'll find if you, as we come into a dry season now over the summer, as you start cutting the devil's fig, it will die on the ground. It's been so wet and so humid and cool as well, relatively cool, but things aren't perspiring. You know, when the plant falls on the ground, it's meant to perspire. It loses all its moisture through its leaves and then just shrivels and dies. And you generally can rely on devil's fig to do that, but the problem is that, and a lot of people here, you're living up these valleys in these really high rainfall areas through the wettest year on record, so it's not perspiring, and then it's even probably rooting from its self. So, I mean, you just put it in a pile and burn the pile. Or, of course, you know, you've got to cut the stump, apply a herbicide to the stump, and then apply it to what you cut as well. You know, so that you're actually killing the thing you cut with herbicide. You know. But, I mean, a lot of people, maybe up these valleys as well, also live on communities where they don't use herbicide. So giant devil's fig on communities where they don't use herbicide is pretty difficult task.
It's only impossible when it gets past.
Another way of controlling devil's fig is via shade. You know, so the less light, the less growth of your devil's fig. So it likes disturbance. So if you get a really strong rainforest canopy up, devil's fig isn't really an issue weed. Yeah, so it's a big issue. And if you're not making a plan for your area, all you're really getting yourself into is endless maintenance of those devil fig places. So, the best thing is to choose an area, work on it, plant some trees in there, get them up, and then rely on creating a dense shade level to control your weeds. And and have a think about what's going on. So when you get back to your properties, have a look at those areas where there's heaps of lantana and heaps of devil's fig, and look at what's going on above them. Often you might have really big flooded gums. If you see flooded gums, got a massive white cylindrical trunk. It's growing up those rich areas, and you might have like flooded gum forest way up high, heaps of birds up there dropping devil's fig seeds, and then lantana underneath, or something like that. So you've got to think about how that can work for you. So, are you going to be able to get a grass layer in there that you can burn, or is it like quite a wet area? Maybe you just have to develop like a wet sclerophyllus kind of mid-story of rainforest plants with a mixed forest type, with eucs and rainforest kind of interacting so that you can manage your property. So I think that's the practical solution for a lot of people that are living up in these rich valleys where the weeds are really bad. And then say in your community you've got the rich parts where the weeds are really bad, and then you're climbing up through the ridge lines, and you might be coming through some transitional areas, and then you might get up into the top, and maybe you've got some grass trees around, or you're noticing some different grass layer diversity. Maybe you've got more shrubby sclerophyllus things and some rocky outcrops and stuff. And I think that you'd find up there that the devil's fig problem isn't as bad, because what you're experiencing there is an area of lower fertility in the soil. You've got the same rainfall because geographically it's the exact same place almost, but then you've got a lower fertility area. So in that area, your weed problem will be different, and your problems will be more associated with what Ollie's talking about and wanting to have that country really healthy and encouraging good fire and that kind of stuff. So when you're then working into your lower sections of the property where there's still eucalypts for a variety of reasons, sometimes historically planted eucalypts, sometimes regenerating from outer areas, and then I really do think that in those rich environments you need to be promoting rainforest trees and creating shade for your devil's fig. So tree planting is so good for you guys up in the valleys, as long as you can guard from wallabies. Obviously there's heaps of wallabies when you're up in the hills, but trees grow really well, So if I lived up in the hills, I'm from down in the valleys, like Eltham, so we don't have as many wallabies. We've got bit of a bad wallaby thing going on at home at the moment. But if I was you guys, I would say get in there, clear bush and plant, Get into planting trees as much as possible.
What do wallabies like to eat?
They like eating saplings by the looks of it. Yeah.
I know they eat grass, but
I reckon wallabies like hanging out in a nice grassy area. So if you've got that area which is a nice healthy grassy area which is open and sunny, and like the wallabies love hanging out there, I don't think they're really under threat in our environments. Really, a lot of those wallabies, I think they're doing pretty well.
what they like to eat.
Yeah, and I reckon you can't really go wrong up in these hills, because if the main thing is you just got dense infestations which are suppressing your natural diversity. You've got heaps of growth and heaps of richness and all this stuff and heaps of connectivity to really great environments all around you. So it's all flooding in. Other people, comparatively, they're sitting in ecological deserts. They're kilometres and kilometres and kilometres away from a good seed source, away from animals. They're not experiencing things that, here in the Channon and surrounds we have a connection to, So for you guys, really the big challenge is those rapid growing, heavy infestations of weeds that are suppressing your natural diversity. Camphor laurel's a big challenge. Privet, big challenge. Privet even more so than camphor laurel because it's a little bit shade tolerant. Ageratum. Yeah. Yeah, so I would promote for you guys to get in and do some intensive areas. Find a small area that you really like or something that you really value you know, maybe down near your creek, or maybe a track that you want to walk on past your house or something. Go in there, do some intensive weed control, get rid of all the weeds, 100% of the weeds in an area, and then plant and create a forest and look after that forest until it appears to be looking after itself, and then hop into a new section from there. You know, rather than trying to control all the weeds on your property at once and thinking as a biosecurity threat, just get in there, control an area, plant, make it sustainable, see how it's going looking after itself, and then move on to a new section would be my advice. Yeah, I guess as long as you're actually planting intensely enough and actually getting rid of the wild tobacco. So it's not really effective as a regeneration technique to leave wild tobacco. But if you're actively planting in that area and you're actively growing native trees and you're active in that area, then you can make it work for yourself, you know. But devil's fig, yeah. So that's why I wouldn't really recommend wild tobacco. Yeah, I reckon there's lots of potential. So, like, I was trying to explain the idea of, well, Ollie kept saying, like, you got to look for grass. If he's going to burn, he's looking for grass all the time, right? So the way that grass grows is it wants a certain amount of light. So grass and the relationship with those native grasses, they grow in a similar way to the invasive pasture grasses. You know, they grow in a similar environment. And, like, even though sometimes the guys might be working on a full-blown grassland, sometimes they might be working on a grassland that grows in an open forest with trees dotted throughout the landscape. And there's koala tracks, and there's gliders living in the trees, and there's honey eaters using the things, and there's all kinds of stuff going on an invertebrate level in this diverse ground layer. So I think that's a wonderful idea to try to, and I think that pasture and grazing is a great kind of sustainable model for open forests as well, especially on a large scale. So the one thing that they're doing though, the negative is that you can't probably have the same species richness on the ground level as you would with a really well maintained open forest with fire, in my limited knowledge. But the positive is that you can have a really long-term, weed-free, grassy, treed environment. So I think you can aim to do that in a big way. So there's lots of koala projects. I've actually, as well as doing rainforest stuff, been involved with heaps of koala plantings. And I think that is the solution for the koala issue, is basically trees across areas that are grazed, where you get your biodiversity from value from the tree and from the safe passage through the trees, and then you sustain your land through your horses or your cows. Yeah, well, maybe one easy way of starting is you could just run an electric fence down a temporary fence down one of your boundaries and plant out like a corridor, a very simple corridor along one of your boundaries of eucalypt species. Yeah, but if you're wanting to balance it, if it's out of balance, that must mean that there's not enough trees going on, and or maybe there's too many trees. Where's your property at the moment in that spectrum? Like, obviously, when I'm talking about rainforest, that really is my specialty, I'll just say. And as I start talking about all this other stuff, I'm going out of my depth, so forgive me and just correct me if anyone knows better than I do. But so, yeah. Well, I work at a local nursery, Firewheel Rainforest Nursery at Darrowby. I'd highly recommend that you go to them. Yeah. You just keep an eye out around your property and see whether they're spreading. And if they're spreading a lot, then you kill them. And then if they're not spreading, then you don't worry about it too much. Yeah. Oh, that's all right. Forgive yourself. You can only have a go. Okay. Yeah. Oh, well, just monitor your property. If they're coming up and regenerating all over the place, then that means they're a problem. If not, they're not a problem. Anyway, so, I'll try to just talk about that problem with too many trees. It's a bit of a hard one, because what happens when you want to engage with your property in a way of improving the environment and you have to remove native trees? You know, it's not really something I think it's really easy to talk people into doing. It's a relatively negative activity, and it's probably best done with really good advice. But yeah, so anyway, you could say that it's part of understanding those healthy sclerophyllous communities. If you've got, just because all the species that make up the tree canopy layer of those species, just because they're planted in a landscape doesn't mean that community exists. You know what I mean? So you could have them planted 2 metres apart, bam, 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 forestry style. They grow full up high, and they actually do, even though there's a fair bit of light will get let in, you know, they're going to create a really kind of dense forest. So that's not really promoting your ecosystem, your target ecosystem. I was going to walk in there, it's going to find no grass, or basically a few rainforest ground covers that are tolerating the semi-shade. So that's an example of something that they've used the right native species, but they haven't got the structure of the community right. So to fix that, you would actually thin that forest. And I think that, and I don't know anyone that's that experienced with that kind of thing, but the guys do that as part of their projects when they want to introduce fire into an area. They're going to go in there, they might start taking rainforest trees out or something like that. But yeah, if you've got a really dense forestry plantation on your place or something, I don't know, maybe you should think about taking them out. But then you've got to consider where the fuel goes, how much fuel you're going to leave on the ground, whether you can afford to leave standing dead trees, and there's a whole lot of other things with that. So that's aimed for your property with your horses, but I don't know how, it's hard to think how you're going to get that into balance. Maybe you should think about looking at it in a way where you think some of those rainforest trees are creating too much shade, but it's a relatively hard step. Yeah, well, I don't want to be too prescriptive when it comes to like really dangerous or like highly mobile areas of people's property, because I'm concerned about like people working in those areas and the outcomes. So maybe if you've got a slipped area, maybe it's slipped down to like a really smooth gradient and you can see that the site's kind of like half stabilised itself by the way it's slipped. Or maybe it's slipped into a violent way where you've got really steep cliffs and you can see that preliminary slip is just a sign that you're going to get worse slips in the future. So then if I act too high and mighty about my own practices and take on your big, dangerous, highly mobile slipped area and in a prescriptive manner that guarantees success, I think that that we all have to be cautious as to say we've got the magic bullet for that kind of thing, but that you can probably work around your areas in a conservative way and distance yourself from areas that are really dramatic, and try to find areas where you might be able to encroach from, like work from a healthier part that's neighbouring that area and bring it out. Again, with tree planting, I think tree planting is a really basic, really easy way to engage. And otherwise you might think to try to establish some healthy grass on any slips or exposed soil that are there, and you might maybe just chuck out some grass seed or something like that. Seemed to be a fairly good recommendation from some of the other talks I've gone to on the topic. Yeah, cool. Okay, so I might just change the theme of the conversation for a little bit, just to the end. So the other side of it is everyone's working on their own properties and trying to do their best on the thing, but we also have like a really strong, big, like it can be scary, but big, thriving regen industry. And in this country, there is definitely a really big push to give back to the environment as well. So there's a lot of help that you can get out there. So I've just chucked a few logos up here of some different organisations and projects around the place, which depending on your property and the way it works, like they might work for you. So like the main Border Rangers Richmond Valley Land Care are fantastic. They're absolute leaders in providing bush regeneration services onto people's properties. Emma Stone she's just fantastic. So, they do devil's fig programs, they do cat's claw programs, they do open forest programs. They're just amazing. So, Firewheel Rainforest Nursery, where I work, it's a great place to get trees. It's a simple thing to get a tree and put it in the ground, and loving and caring for trees is just a fantastic way to regenerate the land. It's very simple and caring, and it's a good place as well for the community to get in touch with bush regenerators and different services and projects that are going on. Local Land Services has info and people to help you, ways to get assessments on your property, all these kind of groups, involved with the SLIP stuff, Richmond Valley Land Care and that kind of stuff. And then, so depending on the way your property is, like maybe you might have large open areas that you want to do tree plantings on, or you want to take on some riparian tree planting stuff, and there's a massive will there, but it really does depend on what your property is like. But anyway, so there's a few kind of names there. Bangalow koalas do a lot of tree planting. There's large carbon projects. If you had a area around 25 hectares on your property that you would plant up, there's great projects where they actually fund the project, fund for 3 years of maintenance, and then give you money per hectare for the planting for its lifetime. So there's great opportunities, and I mean the industry is there to turn to, but it's hard to know exactly how you if you're a small landowner working in a really intensive weed environment, how you get access to industry help. It can be difficult, I appreciate it, and probably if you were to pay someone to do the work on your land, that can often be too expensive for you. But I mean, I can't presume to understand what everyone's resources are. But what you can do is get some advice along the way and interact with the industry a little bit. Definitely don't be afraid of it. The land care groups are great for that, and people like Firewheel are really great for that as well. I highly recommend that you go to some of these places. Big Scrub Land Care, which has just become Big Scrub Rainforest Conservancy, they publish a really great book called the Subtropical Restoration Manual, and in it is like a guide to lots of different weed control techniques, different herbicide usages, understanding how you might put together some projects, some different species and different classes of species, rainforest species, and how you work through them. So I highly recommend that you try to get your hands on some of that stuff. Yeah. Nan, do you guys sell the restoration manual through yours? No. Yeah. And is there anywhere at the Channon where they might sell that? No.
I think I've got it in the book warehouse.
Book warehouse, yeah, in town. So if I've been a little bit brief, but it's just ended up being a good chance to discuss with you guys the kind of things that are going on in your world, because my bush regeneration world isn't always your bush regeneration world, and my environment isn't always your environment. But, all I can say is, I just stand up here and be a person who's doing it, say, get out there and do it. It's so great, it's so rewarding. But, work in stages, it would just be my big advice. Try to aim for stability on your land. Yeah.
The nursery you work at.
Yeah.
Do you sell the vine that the Richmond bird vine?
Yeah, I think we do sell it sometimes. Yeah.
I had
Alex Stevens.
Killing like huge areas of Dutchman's pipe that had grown over massive trees.
Mm.
Which was great, but it would be really good to replace it with the right one. I don't know where to get it.
Yeah, I think we've been growing some.
Firewheel do have it. It's quite slow growing and it's not quite ready for selling yet.
Yeah. But a couple of summer months and everything will be fast growing now for the next 8 weeks. So try in 8 weeks' time. Yeah. So yeah, any other questions? Otherwise I might pull myself up.
Yeah, I've got one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a very thick outbreak of Dutchman's pipe near where I live.
Mm.
Do you have an idea of how to start on getting rid of it?
Yeah, well, you guys stop me if you do anything different, but I think probably the best method for controlling those vines would just be to scrape the vine and then paint it with herbicide, just like a glyphosate mix, 1 part glyphosate to 1.5 parts water. If you just, it's a pretty easy, low, you're not getting much movement of the herbicide away from anywhere but the plant. You just get a knife and start at the base and scrape the base and scrape up the vine and leave it intact and apply herbicide along a good length of it. Yeah, just try it. It's not too laborious really. Just fiddle around in there a few hours here and there a week, you'll probably get through it. Yeah, well, have a think about cutting some. If they're really big, you might want to even inject them with a drill. But yeah, I think that's a really good question. Like, it represents a big grey area because vines are a natural part of the environment and they naturally thrive in disturbed areas in a forest where heaps of light is rushing in. And then in that disturbed area, they're colonising, they're super dominant, they're a massive resource. Yeah, spiky, but they're also a beautiful resource for the environment. They're host to beautiful butterflies. They have all these positive features. And like a lot of things that we're dealing with our new environment, is that they can also you can just come out of whack and lose your balance with the vines as well. So like, I definitely would promote killing some native vines here and there when you have to, but it's like, it's a balance. It's a balance. Like, if you've got only a small section of trees on your property and you're trying to make sure that those trees can stay there and that it doesn't get leveled, then you want to, if you're looking up the vines all the way up the plant and the plant's losing its leaves because of the amount of vines that are on it, then I would cut that vine, release that ecosystem, let it become more stable, and then the vines might have a healthier place in it. But yeah, but realistically, I just can't give you an absolute what to do because it's just a bit of a balance. They are natural and really important and beautiful. Like, the guys were talking the other day about how the pink underwing moth, which grows on the Coronia vine, it lives and only likes to exist, the grub exists from about 80 centimetres to 120 centimetres. But it's a rainforest vine which grows way high up in the canopy. So what that tells me is that Coronia vine and its perpetual relationship with that moth depends entirely on massive vine infestations through large disturbed areas of forest. So you might have Coronia vine, you might have pink underwing moth. So, you never really know how it's going. Okay, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad that we've just been able to talk.